The comments and statements made within the show are the opinions of the commentators and their guests, have not been evaluated by the FDA, and are in no way attempt to diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. The contents of this show are not to be construed as medical advice. If you have a health condition or health concern, please contact a licensed, qualified healthcare practitioner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom, and this is a Supplement Super Sleuth.
That'll be me. And the herbal storyteller.
And that definitely would be me. And together, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain of the natural products industry.
We'll be sharing naturals in the news, dispelling lots of myths, interviewing key players in the industry, and highlighting our favorite herbs and supplements.
So with that, let's pull back that curtain and see what's there.
Cue the music.
It's already there.
That's all right. Boy, I tell you, this music always makes me happy because I know it's time to have another adventure with the Supplement Super Sleuth and the herbal story.
And this is our 27th episode, and it's a brand new year, 2023. And
what a great way to start the year.
We're starting off.
Yep, yeah. What a great way to start the year.
So, it's pretty great. All right, so we're going to start with our naturals in the news, which we never miss this, do we?
No, and, I'm glad we don't, because naturals in the news is, there's some really cool stuff in here.
Oh, and I'm really glad.
A lot.
I know. I'm really, really glad we're going to have this conversation finally, because you come from an auspicious family. I affectionately call your family the bee family, but, you have a long lineage of beekeepers in your family. And was it your great-great-great-grandfather?
No, two greats. Only two greats.
Oh, okay. Great-great-grandfather that had contributed to designs of the modern beehive. Is that correct? Do I have this right?
Yep, you have correct. He contributed many things to the design of the modern beehive. Basically he created a hive where they used to have just a straw dome, woven out of straw braids. And the problem with that was when they went to harvest the honey, they had to kill most of the bees to get the honey out, because the brood, the young, were all mixed in with the honey cells. And basically he, created the box, what we now know of as the honey box, the bee box, and put what's called a queen excluder in it. We figured out the way to do a wire mesh that was too small for the queen to get through, but big enough for the rest of the worker bees to get through, because the queen is significantly bigger. And now, 6 generations later, my nieces and nephews and other members of the family are running the business back in Hamilton, Illinois. And we sell the Dadant. They pronounce it Dadant, Dadant,
Dadant instead of Dadant.
Yeah, they don't pronounce it the French way. They don't say Dadant. They say Dadant. Dadant and Sons.
Dadant.
Sells beekeeping supplies all over the world. There's even a wing of the Barcelona Natural History Museum dedicated to my great-great-grandfather.
That's amazing. And I know it's the middle of the winter, but this is the perfect time to start talking about bees and honey. So why don't you take it away? I'm amazed with all of that, and it's one of the things that I hope in the future you'll do is just take some video of you feeding your bees, because you in your backyard still feed the bees. You can't even help yourself.
Nope. It's just and I love doing it. It's absolutely fun. I have I've sort of MacGyvered a bird waterer into a bee feeder, and having read the article on mushroom mycelium extract and how it has a beneficial effect on honeybees, I use a reishi extract from host defense mushrooms, and I basically feed that to the local bees. They're not my bees, because what I do.
You don't have a beehive.
I travel. Yeah.
Right.
But I know that there are dozens of hives in my general neighborhood, and I know where they are, because I see which way the bees leave when they finish tanking up on the sugar water mushroom blend that I give them. And
that's amazing.
But it's really fascinating. Now, one of the things I wanted to cover is that there were scientists who have been studying bees. They're probably the most next to humans. They're the most studied animal on the planet, and they basically are living 50% shorter lifespans than they did 50 years ago. And this is a university of, I believe, let's double check my information here. Yeah, from University of Maryland Entomology Department. And what they did is they took the pupae, the bee that hasn't quite been born yet. They took it out and put it into a carefully protected situation, and they raised it in captivity, so to speak. So it's not out foraging and doing things like that, but they raised it to see how long it would live. And 50 years ago, that lifespan was around 34 to 37 days. And now it is down to a little bit more than 17 days. So that's
not so good.
50% shorter. And what they found is that they found that it's genetic traits that are happening in the bees. They're not certain why that genetic change is taking place, whether it's the influence of viruses that are, the bees are definitely susceptible to because of weakened immune systems from exposure to pesticides and other toxic chemicals that get sprayed on crops or on the ground in so many different ways. But they know that the honeybee is living shorter time, and that all that time is basically divided between the bee is born. It immediately starts taking care of the other baby bees and the queen, and graduates gradually to receiving honey and nectar and pollen coming in from the field. And then as the honey flow really starts to get in, the pollen flow and everything, then they actually graduate the last stage of their life. When you see a bee out on a flower, it's always going to be a female, generally speaking, if it's a honeybee. And that's the last thing she's going to do with her life, is she's going to be gathering pollen and nectar and bringing it back to the hive.
That's amazing.
And, so sometimes on my bee feeders, I'll find bees that's it. They just died on the feeder. And it always breaks me up, but it's like, okay, that's their natural lifespan, but they're doing it with less time. So now out of that 17-day life cycle, they may spend 6 days gathering what will become honey, because it gets changed into honey.
That's not long enough, is it? Really?
No. So it's why honey yields are down. It's why beekeepers are losing on average 30 to 40% of their bees every single year. So imagine if you had a store and you lost 30% of your inventory every year. How long would you stay in business? So it's a
good way to put it, Tom.
Yeah, it's really a blow for beekeepers. And
one of the reasons why we're talking about honey is I know it's January, but I often recommend medicinal honey to my clients for various issues and for various, support of their immune system, of their digestive system. And, we came across some great research and we wanted to share that with you. But I think this background really helps. I know a lot of people are very afraid of bees, but honeybees are different than those yellow jacket hornets and wasps.
Yeah, very much so. And honeybees are very, I feed mine. I don't wear a veil. I don't wear anything. I take if I forget to bring it in at night, by the time I get out in the morning, they're all over it, trying to get the last little bit of what they can out of it. And I have to tap the bottom, and I have to, they buzz all around me and everything. And you would think, okay, they're going to be really pissed off but they know. Bees are very, very intelligent little creatures, and they know that I'm going to take the feeder away. I'm going to bring it back very shortly with more food in it, because they hang around. They hang around right where it's supposed to be.
They follow you into the kitchen, don't they?
Yeah, some of them follow me into the kitchen. Some of them have hitchhiked a ride on my back that I didn't know were there, and then all of a sudden I'm trapping them in the kitchen to put them back outside. But what's really interesting is that, like you said, there's a number of researchers that have gone on honey, and what it, all of its benefits. And it has so many benefits. The most recent one that I've seen it was printed up in Nutrition Reviews. It's a journal, and it's was research from the University of Toronto. And what they did is they did a systematic review and a meta-analysis of all of the different controlled trials that have been done on honey in humans, and seeing whether, what it does as far as mitigating what are called cardiometabolic risk factors. And that's, lipid profiles that are out of balance. So bad cholesterol, bad triglycerides, things like that. And really it's amazing. I mean, the general rap, because of the people's upset around sugar, is that, okay, it's like no sugar, and honey's just sugar. But
it's just, that's
and
not
even
true,
though
right?
even though honey is mostly fructose and sucrose, it is amazingly, it has other types of sugars in there. Nan and I have talked about beneficial sugars. So there are lots of beneficial sugars in the honey besides just the fructose and the
There's
sucrose.
also glucose, and there's also xylose, and it's really very complex.
And there are so many amazing compounds that are brought in from all of the different ranges of variety of pollens and so on, that all go into that honey. And the really important thing is, if you're taking honey, you really want to make sure that it's non-pasteurized honey. Pasteurization, heating honey like that, really does not do it any good. You can put it in your tea. That's not going to denature it too much. But when you pasteurize it, then it gets to be a problem.
Right.
Yeah, then it gets to be a problem. And they literally ended up doing 18. They looked at over 809 different studies. It gives you an idea of how many studies.
How long right?
Yeah, and those are not just studies. Those are all clinical, double-blind type studies.
Some of them done on athletes, some of them done on like cardiovascular markers.
They settled on 18 of them, and that was a total of 1,100 different participants. And their average daily, serving was 40 grams, which, is not all that much as far as honey.
It's not
a couple of
maybe a teaspoon,
couple of teaspoons,
maybe a couple of teaspoons,
yeah. And they were looking at all of it. I mean, they were looking at fasting triglycerides and lipoprotein and tumor necrosis factor and uric acid production and everything. And altogether, honey was found to improve lipid outcomes by reducing total cholesterol, LDL-C, fasting triglyceride levels. It increased HDL, and oral consumption of honey, increased tumor necrosis factor alpha levels in the body, which is a really good thing for your immune system. So it has a very beneficial immune system effect as well. And all of the different honeys have different sugar levels. They have different levels of compounds, other nutrients that you would want in there. And one of the really interesting quotes that in the study was, the word among public health and nutrition experts has been that sugar is sugar. Well, the results from this study show that that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and honey is about 80% sugar, majority is fructose and glucose. It found that there are lots of other bioactive substances in there that really do provide cardiometabolic health benefits. Mm-hmm. So eat your honey.
Yeah, glucose acts really differently in the body than fructose. And of course, high fructose corn syrup deserves the bad rap it has.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a monster molecule. That's what I call it. It's like a Franken molecule, and it is very insidious in the body. But regular fructose is different, acts differently than high fructose corn syrup, and glucose acts differently than fructose. So there was a really interesting study that was done at University of Florida. I think it was we're going on 10 years now, that was done on athletes for recovery after extreme exercise. And they tested different electrolyte drinks. And I guess I remember I don't have it in front of me, but I remember reading it thinking, that's amazing. There were 10 different types of post-exercise, supplements taken. One of them was raw honey. And
Mhm.
raw honey performed the best out of all of the 10 post exertion, post exercise, for replacing electrolytes, for reestablishing healthy glucose levels in the bloodstream, and also for reducing inflammation.
Yep.
So I thought that was incredible. It was done at University of Florida probably a decade ago. You can go fish it out if you want, but that was just honey compared to all these fancy, expensive drinks. Now that's raw honey,
Mhm.
unpasteurized honey.
Again,
So
yeah,
I just
unpasteurized
want to
honey is
be
the way to go.
specific about that, right? All
So,
right, cool.
and you know, one of the problems with that is that if you're the what's really cool about honey is when you buy from local beekeepers, when you buy from your local beekeeper, you
Yeah.
are supporting not only that beekeeper's livelihood, but you are supporting the pollination of crops all around your area, because those beekeepers, those bees are pollinating all the flowers and the vegetables. They pollinate about 60 to 70% of everything we eat. So
It's amazing.
supporting your local beekeeper by buying honey locally that's unpasteurized is really not only good for you, good for the bees, but also good for the planet. How can you not win?
Right. It is all win. Right. Cool. Is that it for honey? That's a lot.
That's it for honey. That's it,
Okay.
honey. I'm done with the honey. So
Okay. So next headline comes from medicalnews.net. SARS CoV2 infection triggers reactivation of latent viruses in people with chronic fatigue syndrome. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up is I often see people in my practice with, what we would say chronic illnesses or orphaned illnesses that have not responded. They're non-responders to Western medicine intervention, which is
yeah,
unfortunate because it kind of leaves them out there in the cold. So oftentimes this group of people end up in offices like mine, not just mine, but like mine, where we're using Eastern, herbal traditions in order to support people and help them to have a better quality of life, if possible. And this is really interesting because a lot of people often wonder about this long-term fatigue that happens at the end of a SARS-CoV-2 infection. And in some cases, people who already know they have chronic fatigue, they're back in that, they may have felt better, they may have gotten help, and then all of a sudden they get COVID-19 and they're back to being symptomatic again. So severe long-term fatigue post can happen after coronaviruses, but definitely can happen to re-trigger latent viruses. So this particular conclusion from this study from the University of Sweden was really interesting to me because we don't often talk about latent viruses in Western medicine because you either test for an infection or you don't. And there's not really a discussion about latent infection in naturopathy and in, other forms of natural medicine. We do talk about latent
well, yeah, well,
infections.
we have to, because look at Lyme's disease. I mean, Lyme's disease can go
Exactly.
dormant, like under the radar, stealth, run silent, run deep, sort of go into stealth mode,
Yeah,
and then reappear years later.
exactly. And this can happen with a lot of these I would say, more resistant types of infective agents. So the results for this clinical trial were published in Frontiers in Immunology, and it really does contribute to our knowledge of the causes of disease and the prospects of reaching a diagnosis with people who have long-term chronic illnesses. Severe long-term fatigue, post-exertional malaise, which means that you go to exercise, you feel worse. So we call that post-exertional malaise. Sleep, pain and sleep problems are absolute characteristic signs of myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And the causes of the condition are not necessarily known, but certainly it has been established that most of these cases follow a viral or bacterial infection that doesn't get fully cleared from the system. The health of the person infected is not restored even after the original infection is resolved. And indeed, the condition is sometimes known by its alternative name, post-viral fatigue. Since the cause is not known, diagnostic tests have not been developed. One of the theories that have been examined in several research studies in Sweden is that a new infection can activate viruses that lie latent in the body's cell after the previous infection. It's long been known that several herpes viruses, for example, can remain in a latent state in the body and years later can be reactivated and rise to give new disease. And we call, a lot of people actually get vaccinated for these kinds of latent
shingles is another one.
Shingles actually is the herpes virus. It's a chickenpox virus, which is in the same family, and it lies latent in the body. And then something, usually stress, causes it to kind of reactivate. Yeah. So this was a really interesting study because 95 patients who have been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and 110 healthy controls participated in this Swedish study. They provided blood and saliva samples on 4 occasions during 1 year. So the study happened for a year. It's an excellent study, really well done. The researchers analyzed samples for antibodies against SARS CoV2 and other latent viruses and found a special fingerprint of antibodies against common herpes viruses in the saliva. One of these viruses was the Epstein-Barr virus, which has infected nearly everyone on the planet. Most people experience a mild infection during childhood. People who are infected with EBV in their teenage years can develop glandular fever, commonly called mononucleosis, also known as the kissing disease, but that's you can get it from not kissing. The virus then remains latent in the body, and then the EBV virus can proliferate in situations where the immune system is impaired, causing fatigue, an autoimmune response, and increased risk of lymphoma if allowed to continue. Approximately half of the participants in the study were infected with SARS CoV2 during the first wave of pandemic and developed mild COVID-19 symptoms. So 58% of those with CFS and 41% of the control group who did not have CFS. In more than 1/3 of these cases, infection had been asymptomatic. So the person didn't even know they had it, but they had antibodies against it. After the SARS-CoV-2 infection had passed, however, the researchers detected specific antibodies in the saliva that suggested that 3 latent viruses had been strongly reactivated, one of them being EBV. The reactivation was seen both in patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and in the control group, but was significantly stronger in the chronic fatigue symptom group. So what happens is this domino effect in the body, right? The infection with a new virus, SARS-CoV-2, can activate other latent viruses in the body. And what's really interesting is that in my practice, there were quite a few in my cases who had post-fatigue also did get shingles after COVID-2. So I found that really interesting. Of course, we gave them lots of support and help, but it was because latent viral infections in the body were reactivated from the stress of having SARS-CoV-2. So it happens. It absolutely can happen. And we're seeing it as a truism in natural medicine, and hopefully the understanding of this latent viruses or latent infections can be reactivated by a new infection will start to be understood and accepted by Western medicine, because like you said, Tom, Lyme's disease is classic, right?
Yeah.
That there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. I beg to differ because I see it all the time. And that there can be a reactivation when there's burden put on the immune system. So one of the researchers said that when they pointed out that there's a great deal of overlap between the symptoms of a CFS and those with long COVID, which is experienced by around 1/3 of patients who contracted COVID-19. Exhaustion after light exercise, brain fog, unrefreshing sleep are common symptoms. Impaired lung capacity, abnormal sense of smell and taste are more specific for long COVID. The researchers believe that the results from the study can contribute to developing immunological tests to diagnose chronic fatigue syndrome and possibly also long COVID. So this is a really interesting study. It was, the journal reference is Apostolo E et al. 2022, saliva antibody fingerprint of reactivated latent viruses after mild asymptomatic COVID-19 is unique in patients with myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was published in Frontiers of Immunology. Please check it out. For those of you who are really struggling to get back to your normal life after possibly being exposed to SARS CoV2. So really, really great study. Well done. Well done.
All right. And then, interestingly enough, on the topic of COVID and vaccines and so on and so forth, I found it to be, anyway, for me, very fascinating article published in November 16th in the British Medical Journal. So that's a very prestigious, BMJ, British Medical Journal, is a very prestigious publication.
Oh, yes.
Especially respected by the medical community. And the title of that article was Investigation Raises Concerns About Poor FDA Oversight of Clinical Trials. Now, we've had a guest, Daniel Fabricant, on a couple of times talking about the FDA and how they're worried about, supplements in the supplement industry that are actually drugs, and they want to take them away from the supplement industry because they should be drugs and they should only be used by by doctors and MDs and so on and so forth. So we won't get into that too much, but what they found is that regulatory documents, this is a quote, show that only 9 out of 153 Pfizer trial sites were subject to FDA inspection prior to licensing the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. 10 out of 99 Moderna, and only 5 out of 73 for remdesivir. Those sites, the FDA is supposed to be looking at all of those sites to make sure that the trials are going appropriately. Evidently, that was not what was happening. And it has raised concerns in the medical community all over the place. When a whistleblower reported, for instance, that there were some anomalies going on with some of the trials that were going on, that were, including falsified data, unblinded patients, inadvertently or inadequately trained vaccinators who were slow to follow up on adverse events. When it was reported to the FDA, they didn't do anything about it. So, even the FDA said, well, we didn't have enough people to do inspections. We only had 89 inspectors, even though there are an estimate hundreds of thousands of clinical trial sites in operation across the U.S. and abroad. And the FDA is supposed to be inspecting those. And they're saying, well, we're trying to get back up to our yearly average of 100. So this is very interesting. But, you've got one of the quotes here is, I don't think that it's a sufficient number of staff to do that kind of level of oversight. This is Jill Fisher, a professor of social medicine at the University of North Carolina. The FDA must have enough of a presence to dissuade investigative sites from committing fraud. So especially, in looking at everything that's gone on with the pandemic and the sort of future pacing of, okay, well, there's more pandemics out there. There's more, things coming. We've all got to be ready. The speed with which those vaccines were created plays right into this whole idea of they were not adequately inspected. And so anything that might have been, missed or could have been found rather, was missed because of lack of inspection. So,
well, I find it so interesting because we are in the natural products industry held to the same level of scrutiny as any pharmaceutical
we get more inspections evidently than vaccine creation sites.
Which to me is kind of curious because, yes, I think it's really important for us to have a standard and to meet those standards so that there's no injury, right? People are not going to be taking a supplement and be injured by those supplements.
Right.
I agree. I think that's really important. And we do have to have structure around that. It's extremely important. And we do. It's called CGMP. It's Certified Good Manufacturing Practices. And any manufacturer that creates an herbal or a nutraceutical supplement that is sold in the commercial market must put on their bottle whether they're CGMP or not, right? So that's really, really important. And we are held under great scrutiny for that. So it's amazing to me to hear this, Tom. And when you brought this up and we were having a quick conversation about it, I was sort of shocked, thinking, well, wait a second, that's a little bit of a double standard, because, you know, there are laws that are right now in Washington that may eradicate the public's ability to have commercial access to supplements and herbs and homeopathics based on the conversation. And it is just a conversation because there's no fact that actually supports this statement that we are completely unregulated
yes.
in our industry. And that's not true. We are regulated. We're held to the same standard that the pharmaceutical industry is held to.
And we know that you know, the way it's policed, they could come in as a dual-edged sword with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which has everything to do with advertising, and they can completely shut a company down, no matter how big they are, if they decide they're doing something that shouldn't be done. Now, here's the interesting thing, you know, according with regards to this research, basically, you know, the FDA's response to all of these claims is that, well, it needs to be better funded and staffed to be able to conduct better inspections. Okay, at minimum, the agency needs to inspect sites when complaints or concerns have been filed. However, you know, this is the final bit of the article. The FDA is not under-resourced. Its total budget for 2021 was a staggering $6.1 billion. So he suggested the agency needs to
I could do with $6.1 billion.
leaner and more efficient, with employees interested in improving health in public health. You know, half of its budget, about $3 billion, is discretionary, which means it could have hired contractors, retirees, or repurposed existing workers. It chose not to. The FDA is just yawning its way through the pandemic. The entire agency is broken. That's a quote from one of the people who contributed to this article. So, you know, as you know, we're not screaming conspiracies or anything like that, but what we are screaming here is that, you know, we pay for the FDA. We pay for them to be vigilant. Right. And they, you know, I'll give you one more, then we can move on, because we've got a whole bunch of wonderful stuff to talk about.
Yes.
But the FDA, this is another quote from a pharmacist and pharmacologist who worked as an FDA medical reviewer between 2007 and 2011, and then as a senior advisor to the FDA commissioner in 2019 to 2021. And he says the FDA is endangering public health by not being candid about violations that are uncovered during clinical trial site inspections. Basically, he said that, you know, it has inspected less than, where's the little deal here? It has inspected less than, right here. There's a long history of failing to adequately oversee clinical trial sites. For example, a 2007 report by the Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General found the FDA audited less than 1% of the nation's clinical trial sites between 2000 and 2005, and was highly critical of the agency because it did not have a database of operational clinical trial sites. So I'm sure they're trying to clean up their act. They better be, with news coming out like this. It's kind of a big black eye. But as the public, we need to talk to our senators. We need to talk to and have the FDA not be heavy-handed, but do their job.
Yes.
If we're going to spend $6 billion, for the Federal Drug Administration, it's not just that they should be trying to punish the natural industry because we're using, things that actually work in people. They should also be looking at these giant corporations making hundreds of billions of dollars on vaccines that are evidently not adequately tested.
Yeah, evidently. Okay.
Just my 2 cents.
I don't know. Excellent. Interesting article. Really interesting article. Okay, next headline from Medical Express, a place that Tom often goes and says, "Hey, Nan, what about this?" This was published November 15th, 2022. Genes to potentially diagnose long-term Lyme disease identified. So the reason why I thought this was really good is a good portion of my practice is chronic Lyme. And I know a lot of people are told there is no such thing as chronic Lyme, but I beg to differ. I see a lot of people this way. And my heart goes out to them. And okay, so maybe it's not chronic Lyme. Maybe it's chronic fatigue syndrome. Then Lyme disease made it worse. Or maybe they got bit by a tick and they got SARS CoV2. But for whatever issue, the client themselves is calling it chronic Lyme and they're ill and they're not doing well. Well, the reason why we wanted to talk about this article was that researchers at Mount Sinai, New York, identified 35 genes that could be used as a biomarker for what happens post Lyme infection. They're very highly expressed in people with long-term Lyme disease, these 35 genes. These genes could potentially be used as biomarkers to diagnose patients with the condition, which is otherwise difficult to diagnose and treat. In some cases, some physicians basically say there is no such thing as chronic Lyme. The findings were published November 15th in the journal Cell Reports Medicine, may also lead to new therapeutic targets to help those who have chronic Lyme. The study is the first to use scriptomics as a blood test to measure RNA levels in patients with long-term Lyme disease. Lyme disease, everyone knows, tick-borne illness. It's not well understood. There are 30,000 diagnosed cases that are reported to the CDC each year, but the estimated real number is closer to, ready for this, 476,000 cases, carrying an annual healthcare cost of $1 billion in the United States. Most patients are diagnosed and treated with antibiotics at the earliest stage of Lyme. About 20% of the patients develop long-term complications. That includes arthritis, neurological symptoms, heart problems, and etc. A lot of my clients have unexplained neuropathies that have been tested for real neuropathies that come up negative. So Lyme, and the spirochete that creates Lyme is called Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the one that we do most of our research on. That particular critter is what's called a spirochete. Spirochetes are the close cousin of Borrelia is syphilis spirochete. They are well known to be extremely successful in cloaking themselves against the human immune system. So they can dive deep, become latent. The human immune system can't find them, cannot attack them. And then some stressor, some other infection can make it, can make the system weakened, and the Lyme disease can reemerge, and it can be pretty awful. As part of this study, the RNA sequencing was conducted using blood samples. 152 patients had symptoms of post-treatment Lyme disease. They measured their immune response. Combined with RNA sequencing data for 72 patients with acute Lyme disease, 44 uninfected controls, the investigators observed differences in gene expression and found that most of the post-treatment Lyme disease patient had a distinctive inflammatory signature compared to the acute Lyme disease group and compared to the uninfected controls. So in addition, by analyzing the differentially expressed genes in the study group with genes that are differentially expressed due to other types of infections, such as Epstein-Barr virus, SARS-CoV2, the researchers identified a subset of genes that were highly expressed, which have not been previously established for this Lyme-associated inflammatory response. So this is exciting to me because, and this is early, so don't go running out calling your doctor as if oh, I want that new gene test to find out, because it's so early. But I'm definitely going to keep one eyeball on this. Tom will keep an eyeball on it. We really want to watch this because so many people suffer from post-Lyme malaise, and they're orphaned, just like EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. They're orphaned in the healthcare system. So having a better way to say, yes, indeed, they have post-Lyme inflammatory responses, and then finding a way to manage it is going to be really the next frontier of health for those who are suffering with chronic Lyme disease. Yeah.
So that's another great article.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And my final contribution here is, again, from Medical Express. I really love the fact that they, even when you go online with them, they'll tell you, okay, this was released 10 hours ago. This was released 18 hours ago. This was released on the 23rd, and so on. This one is, again, on the November the 11th of 2022, and it says probiotic backpacks, under quotations, show promise for treating inflammatory bowel diseases. And it's a study coming out of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. And, the way it starts out, which is kind of interesting, it's like elite firefighters heading into the wilderness to combat an uncontrolled blaze. Probiotic bacteria do a better job quelling gut inflammation when they're equipped with the best gear. So this was a study done on looking at, can we improve treatments for inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and so on. And what they're finding is that, they know using beneficial bacteria is really a wonderful, wonderful way to go. And they have previously, the School of Pharmacy at University of Wisconsin in Madison had previously designed a technology of encapsulating or encasing some beneficial bacteria within a very thin protective shell, so that those bacteria could survive the stomach acids and survive competing microbes long enough to establish and multiply in the guts of the test animals that they were doing. Now, these are animal tests. So again, like Nan says, don't run out asking for your probiotic backpack yet. But the technology makes orally administered probiotics much more effective. And even though IBD, irritable bowel disease, is a very complex disease, there's many different ways you have to attack it. It usually involves, gut microbial communities that have gone way out of balance. So one of the things that they do here is these were all mouse studies. So again, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we translate this into humans? But what they're known is that IBD has a lot of what are called reactive oxygen species that are overrunning the intestinal tract, specifically the colon. And that causes damage. As you might think of reactive oxygen species, you think about that going on with rust, for instance. It's just it's a damaging inflammatory process. And what they found is that those molecules, they're very crucial for certain types of human bodily function. We need them. It's not like you want to get rid of all of them. But if you get too many, then they can create damaging inflammation along the lining of the intestinal tract. So what they did is they created some little nanoparticles, and these nanoparticles are their quote unquote their backpacks. And so they're part sulfides and part hyaluronic acid. Now, you may know hyaluronic acid for, it's help with reducing inflammatory processes in the joints and in connective tissue in the skin and eyes and so on like that.
We've talked about hyaluronic acid.
Yes,
too.
we have. It's very important compound. Mm-hmm. And it's very anti-inflammatory. And then the sulfide itself directly targets the reactive oxygen species to reduce them back down to a better number. And what they found here is that they're actually able, with the mice they were researching on, they were able to very much improve their condition. Normally, when you've got irritable bowel disease, your colon actually shrinks. And you start to experience weight loss because, again, your digestion is just not working. You're not absorbing what you're eating, and your colon is shrinking. And your colon is that's our fermentation tank, if you will, in our body, where we're literally breaking things down even more
Right.
than we do in the small intestine, and
Right.
absorbing them more from the colon than even the small intestine. So
Right.
what they found is that the colon shortening didn't happen as much with the mice that were given the backpack with the probiotics. And they're working on, okay, now we get to figure out how we can translate this to humans. So really kind of a fascinating
Very
study for me,
promising.
because I know that, intestinal dysbiosis like that is rampant in our country. And it would be nice to get something that can actually have promise to treat IB, irritable bowel disease.
Absolutely. That's great. I love that. Very promising, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lots more to do in that realm of health and medicine. Yeah. So I have one more headline, and then we'll get on with our favorite things. But so we often talk about melatonin, and we've talked about melatonin in our sleep section. But I do want to say this again. You can overdo it. I talked to one person who said that they were taking, ready for this? Because 10 milligrams is a lot, right? That's a high dose. This person was taking 80 milligrams of melatonin, and they were experiencing a melatonin hangover the next day. They said, "Oh, I just feel so groggy." And I thought, well, why are you taking so much melatonin? And they said, well, for some reason, if I don't take that much, I don't sleep. So here's another recommendation that I really want to underscore is think of GABA. Okay, so this article was written at CNET, and it says this dietary supplement can also be used as a sleep aid that won't make you drowsy. When melatonin and other sleep supplements make you drowsy, GABA, G-A-B-A, might be worth a try. The average person takes about 10 to 20 minutes to fall asleep at night, and it shouldn't take longer than that. But that's not the reality for a lot of individuals who lie awake at night. And people who can't get to sleep, they're in sympathetic nervous system mode. They are in fight or flight, and they just don't even know that they are. If your parasympathetic nervous system is strong and tonified, then 10 to 20 minutes you're asleep. Okay. But if you're in a fight or flight, you will lay there and stare at the ceiling. Okay. Sleep aids can cause drowsiness the next day. And some sleep supplements, like melatonin, will make you groggy for the entire day after. So GABA, which is naturally found in the body, okay, promotes a calming effect. GABA is typically taken as a dietary supplement. It has a great track record. It's an amino acid. It's safe. It only affects the early sleep stages and leaves you feeling more awake in the morning as a result of that. So there's some research on GABA, but all of the research that's been done, it's not a huge amount. It's not a robust cross section of worldwide research for over 30 years, but it's an amino acid, so it is safe. And the research that has been done yielded very positive results. So I want to say this as a caveat to the whole melatonin conversation. For some people, when they take melatonin, they have crazy dreams, right? And more is not better. And this culture in America, 10 milligrams is good. Maybe 80 milligrams is better. It doesn't work that way. You can take GABA with other herbs if you like. You can take GABA with, with chamomile or with passion flower or any of your other faves. It really helps address anxiety, stress, and that overactive sympathetic nervous system. So that's why it helps you get to sleep. Is it just kind of quells that fight or flight response that you may not even know is activated in your body. So think of GABA if melatonin either scares you or you've been taking too much melatonin, or if you want an alternative to melatonin. And that's that for our
Naturals
Nats
in the
in the
News.
News.
So that must mean it's time for because we're not having an interview this time, so I think it's time for our music. And this is our favorite
Our
thing.
favorite things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we get to talk about herbs and supplements that we use ourselves, that we use on people that we're working with in order to help them in the most natural way possible. And we love this segment because these are things that we use. That's like, woohoo, we like them.
All right. So one of my favorite things is Hypericum perforatum, also known as St. John's wort. And this herb is, first of all, it's beautiful. And I often see it growing where I take the dogs for a walk. It's a 5-petaled yellow flower perennial. It's called a weed, but I can't even use that word. I think that's disrespectful. It's common to Western United States, Europe, Asia. I see it growing here in New England, everywhere. If you look at the flowers, there's a small black dot that when you rub it between your fingers, you get a red stain. And that red pigment contains hypericin and hyperforins. So a lot of people have heard of hypericin. Of course, Hypericum perforatum is the Latin for the plant, but there's also hyperforins, or chemical constituents that have been found to be very active when you use the plant. Held up to the light, the leaves of the plant display a number of very bright translucent dots. And that's where the word perforatum comes from, because the leaves look like they've been perforated. And they're very cool to see when you pick up the plant and you hold the leaf up to the light. You see these almost like they look like pores to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a beautiful plant. It's cultivated in Europe, North and South America, Australia, and China. And the aerial parts of the plant are harvested during the flowering season, and they're used in modern standardized extracts. The name St. John's wort has its origin in Christian folk tradition. St. John's wort has a long history of use in traditional European herbal medicine. It was and continues to be used as topical treatments for wounds and burns. And it is an excellent topical. Sometimes people will just put it, they'll put the flowers in olive oil and they'll just use it on their body just to relax their muscles too.
And it's amazing how it changes the color too. It becomes beautiful dark red.
Oh, dark red. So you have these beautiful, delicate yellow flowers, and then you put it in the oil, and then you get this, it looks like this deep blood red oil. It's amazing. It's really kind of amazing thing. It's also been used as a folk remedy for your kidneys, stomach, and lung ailments. It was first noted as a remedy for melancholy and madness by Culpeper in 1652. So that was a long time ago. And Culpeper was, he was a doctor, but back then doctors were herbalists.
Mm-hmm.
Dioscorides, the foremost physician of ancient Greece, as well as Pliny and Hippocrates, recommended the herb for a number of ailments, including sciatica and the bites of poisonous spiders and snakes. Okay, if you say so. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek physician Hippocrates was one of the first to document in writings the therapeutic uses of St. John's wort. And since then, the time during this more modern time, the Swiss physician Paracelsus in 1540 used it to treat mental disorders, and mostly they called it melancholy, but we call it mild depression.
Mm-hmm. Mild
to moderate depression. They call it melancholy. I call it the blues.
Yeah.
It rose from virtual obscurity in the US to become the 5th best-selling dietary supplement in mainstream retail stores in the US after major media coverage of clinical research documenting its relatively safe and efficacy for treating mild to moderate depression. So since 1979, there have been more than 35 controlled human clinical studies of St. John's wort extracts for the treatment of mild to moderate depression. And 2 meta-analyses have documented the relatively safe and suggested probable efficacy of this phytomedicine. St. John's wort is prescribed frequently by healthcare providers in Germany, where approximately 130 million daily doses containing hypericum were prescribed in 1999. So it's very popular in Europe, especially Germany. St. John's wort preparations have also been used in traditional European herbal medicine for antimicrobial and skin healing purposes. And it's also great for aging skin too. You can take it as a tea, alcohol tincture, essential oils, and tablets using either the plant in its crude form or standardized preparations. So some uses, some internal uses: mild to moderate depression. External uses: wound healing, first-degree burns, muscle pain, and myalgia. Other potential uses: seasonal affective disorder, mental depression related to certain diseases, obsessive compulsive disorder, menopause, fatigue, pediatric nocturnal incontinence, premenstrual syndrome, and it can work depending upon the person and if St. John's wort is matches that person's constitutional issues. So St. John's wort has a you would think if it was used with burns that would have this cooling effect, but it's not. It's a little neutral to mildly warming, but it is a vulnerary. It is incredibly healing. So part of the way that it works internally is that it helps to your gastrointestinal tract to heal. Now remember, your skin and your GI tract are the same kind of tissue. It's called epithelial tissue. And there's a lot to say about how when your gut is off, your mood will be off. So St. John's wort has that healing ability internally as it has externally. And so with that, there's a mechanism of action. So if you're taking a fluid extract, a 1-to-1 extract, like an alcohol extract, it's 2 milliliters twice a day. Dry extract would be 300 milligrams of a 5 to 7 extract 3 times a day. And a standardized extract would be standardized to 3% hypericin or 4.5 hyperforin. And you want both hypericin and hyperforin marked on your standardized extract. And that's 900 milligrams daily in 3 divided doses. Generally speaking, I say that with the caveat that you should be working with a clinical herbalist or a naturopath who's trained in herbs, or a chiropractor or nutritionist trained in herbs or herbalism. So don't do this alone if you are unfamiliar with herbs, but know that because of the European Union, there are very strict and organized dosing and recommended serving sizes per 150 pound adult of St. John's wort. Okay, so the onset response to St. John's wort is similar to that for conventional antidepressants. It has been, as an herb, it has been scrutinized and compared with conventional antidepressants over the past 20 years. It takes 2 to 4 weeks, or as long as up to 6 weeks, to build in the system. And to prevent relapse, antidepressants should be continued at full therapeutic doses for at least 6 months after remission. In 1999, most of the research said that there were no known contraindications for healthy individuals or pregnancy and lactation. No known restrictions. The adverse effects are photosensitization in some people, which means that their skin becomes much more sensitive to sunlight. Not everybody goes through that when they take St. John's wort, but quite a few do. And it can occur with excessive dosages, so over 1,800 milligrams a day. So drug interactions, those of you who are on pharmaceutical antidepressants should not take St. John's wort without the express support of your physician or your practitioner. It can interact with SSRI uptake inhibitors and that incredible class of antidepressants. So please be careful there. Don't just run out and think that it'll make your antidepressant work better for you. You really should be having a conversation with a professional. If you are on an antidepressants and you are also considering St. John's wort. It can also interact with oral contraceptives, making them less effective. Anticoagulant drugs like warfarin, making them more, you can get bruising and other kinds of issues with them. So be careful there. The asthma drug theophylline, you have to be careful with that as well. And the anti-HIV drug indinavir. So please be careful there. Make sure before you start taking St. John's wort that you have a conversation with your practitioner prior to use. Also with cardiac medication, digoxin, do not take St. John's wort, okay? Abruptly stopping St. John's wort after prolonged use may increase the concentration of other drugs in the person. So please, again, be careful. Avoid alcohol. You really should. If you're taking St. John's wort for mood, you should avoid alcohol. It has been shown to potentially act with different kinds of drugs. And it's really, really important that if you're on any kind of pharmaceutical that you speak to your practitioner prior to considering it. So I love this herb. For people who have a little bit of SAD, when the sun starts to go away, it's like having sunshine on the inside. St. John, it really is. It is just this beautiful sunshine herb. That's what it is to me. When I look at it, it just makes me smile. It reminds me of the sun. And it can really help you to feel like it's okay that the sun isn't here like today. It's so grim and overcast and icky here in New England. Some of my favorite research on Hypericum perforatum are on the mild depression with somatic symptoms. There's one all the way back from 1994. It was Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry and Neurology. And they did a randomized placebo-controlled double-blinded study with 39 patients with depression and other kinds of somatic symptoms that were related to depression. And Hypericum extract the therapy lasted for 4 weeks. The dosage was 300 milligrams 3 times a day at the onset of the study, as well as after 2 and 4 weeks. And the criteria was analyzed, and what they said was 70% of the patients treated with it were free of symptoms after 4 weeks. Typical symptoms of the depression: lack of activity, tiredness, fatigue, disturbed sleep, feeling blue. They were especially responsive, and in no cases were any undesirable effects observed. So that was a favorite of mine. And there are others that I really love that were all testing both hypericins and hyperforins for that mild to moderate antidepressant. Now, as you can see, there was a high dose scheduled 3 times a day. So I would say 300 milligrams 3 times a day. You have to remember to take it. Most people can get 2 in, right? They get the morning and then get the night.
Right. That middle of the day.
That middle of the day is a tough one. And I know, but if you can do it and you can get your blood levels high with St. John's wort, then you can back down to 2 a day, for kind of keeping you steady through the winter.
Right. That loading can occur for the first 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. It's it's pretty great. There's another one that I really loved, which is St. John's wort in mild to moderate depression, the relevance of hyperferrin for clinical efficacy, 1998, Department of Psychiatry, University of Munich, Germany, in a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-center clinical efficacy and safety of 2 different extracts of St. John's wort were investigated in 147 males and female outpatients suffering from mild to moderate depression, according to the DSM-4 criteria. Following a placebo run-in period of 3 to 7 days, the patients were randomized to one of 3 treatment groups. During the 42-day treatment period, they received 3 of 1 tablet of either placebo or hypericum with hyperferins, or hypericum with 5% hyperferin. So there were 3 different things. You either got a placebo, you got hyperferin with 5%, or hypericum with 5%. And the hypericum preparations were identical, and they only differed in their hyperferin content. Efficacy regarding depressive symptoms was assessed on the 7th day, the 14th day, the 28th day, and the 42nd day. The severity of the illness was also rated by the investigators within that period of time. The last observation of patients withdrawn from the trial prematurely was carried forward. At the end of the treatment day, the 42nd day, the patients receiving 5% hyperferin exhibited the largest reduction versus the smaller amount of hyperferin and the no St. John's wort at all. Okay, so knowing that you have a broad spectrum St. John's wort, not just standardized to hypericins, but including hyperferins and other aspects of the plant, that was the best way to take it. So, and that's what's really important here. And that's why I love that study, because again, it demonstrates the importance of whole herb,
the whole plant.
Herb. The whole plant is what's important. Don't get so locked into it has to be 95% hypericins, because there are other active constituents in the plant of St. John's wort. So,
and nature has a balance. Nature
yes,
provides a balance. And sure, science wants to get instantaneous results, but
it does.
Sometimes instantaneous results don't last, and they don't go as deep as they need to, and they don't do what they're supposed to do. So don't be led astray. Okay,
well, that's my little 2 cents on St. John's wort.
All right, and what I'm going to talk about is really interesting, because the more I read about it, the more it's kind of interesting when you're reading about herbs. Sometimes all of a sudden you'll recognize in that herb, wow, I need that. Oh my God! It's ringing all my bells. Yes. So what I want to talk about is a beautiful, beautiful herb called Avena Sativa. And Avena Sativa is actually what we call milky oats. Now, we all know oats, Quaker oats and the whole 9 yards. And we get it that oats are really good for cholesterol in the body. When we eat them, it's one of the most nutritious grains that you can get. But Avena Sativa is slightly different. This is the oat before it's actually hardened into the oat berry. It's what they call the milky oat tops. Okay, and this is the stage where the oat itself, the plant, is starting to form flowers, and those flowers are starting to form the seeds that they're going to, because that's what the flower is for, is to form the seeds so that it can reproduce itself. And it occurs, for about a week. There's this stage where if you were to go and squeeze that, beginning of what will later be the hard oat berry, it will have a little milky exudate that will come out, like a little white milky sap that comes out. Those are what they call the milky oats. And that's really in terms of where oats are concerned, this is where the magic is really happening. They can be tinctured, they can be made into tea. You can use what's also called oat straw, and oat straw is just a name that's given to the actual plant itself at that stage. It's the same stage though. You want to get it at that milky oat stage, and then you can make that, the interesting thing is traditionally for an oat straw tea, you would put a lot of the oat straw, an ounce of the dried oat straw, and the milky tops, if you could, the seeds as well, into 4 cups of boiling water, and then you would simmer it for 4 to 12 hours. That's a long time. And then, you get this, you've lost a lot of volume, but you get this beautiful drink. Now, the easier way is to do it as a tincture. Now, keep in mind with Avena Sativa, the entire plant, the oat plant, is rich in minerals, like trace minerals like silica, especially. That's why it's so good for your skin. Magnesium, phosphorus, chromium, iron, calcium, different alkaloids, proteins. You've got B complexes, you've got vitamins A and C. So it's a really nourishing plant. And along with the B vitamins and the calcium and the magnesium, also help to soothe and strengthen the nerves. And this is where oat tops or milky oat tops are considered to be the wonderful cure that they are, the wonderful support that they are, because they're literally looked at as being food for the nervous system. Yeah. And this is especially true of when your nervous system has been exposed to long-term stress. And that long-term stress has started to weaken your nervous system. Your nervous system is weakened. It's exhausted. You're depressed. You're overworked. You've got some emotional trauma going on. So, the symptomology would look like irritability, chronic fatigue, inability to focus, even loss of libido, and heart palpitations. All of those can be, very beneficially affected by these milky oat tops or the Avena Sativa. And, the oat straw itself as a tea, again, can work in things like mood and anxiety and daily stress, and helps, especially with sleeplessness. And part of what it's doing is it's just soothing and balancing the nerves. It's balancing the endocrine system itself. So it works on our hormonal system. And this is why it's also associated with, sexual activity, with reproductive activity, hence the saying of, oh, he's sowing his wild oats, or she's sowing her wild oats, because it has that effect of balancing and enhancing, strengthening, if you will, the endocrine system. Now, it's such an amazing plant that you can take it and you can do the Avena Sativa. I'm sure you've seen it as a skin cream. It's wonderful to take a bag of oats and the milky top, especially, and the oat straw, and put it in your bath. And I can remember years ago having these little packets with that ground up oat straw in it that you would put in the bathtub, and it would make the water all milky white. When you squeeze it, it'd be like there was milk coming out of it. And it's so soothing for itchy skin conditions like poison oak and poison ivy and chicken pox, things like that. And then the tincture basically is it's indicated for the same nervous conditions that you would use, like oat straw, like exhaustion, depression, insomnia, anxiety, sexual debility. But it's for more acute cases where you really need to get on top of it, and you really want to use something stronger. That's where the tincture comes in. And again, oat straw, oats, milky oats, they're safe for everyone, from babies to pregnant to nursing moms to elderly people. Yeah. There's only one contraindication, and that is people with celiac disease. Now, generally speaking, this is interesting. Oats are processed with wheat. They're processed in the same factory, the same environment. So if you're not getting your oats from a very known source where you know that they're gluten-free, oats can be problematic for people with celiac or with gluten intolerance. That being said, if you don't have those that problem, milky oat tincture is really great. You do 3 to 5 milliliters, which is, basically 20 to 40 drops out of a dropper bottle 3 times a day. And if you're going to do a cup of tea, you do like 1 to 4 cups of the oat straw tea. There's all kinds of wonderful other information. It's what's called a tropho-restorative agent. So what it's doing is it's reestablishing vital capacity in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. It's very nourishing to your nervous system. It's a tonic. And we've talked about tonics before. So the tonic is something that is a very restorative to your body. It's actually bringing your body back to normal. And this was from a traditional Chinese point of view, this is what a tonic was. It was something that brought you back to normal. Same thing in Ayurvedic medicine. A tonic was considered something that restored your rightful relationship with your body and with the world around you. So it has a very stabilizing function for the organs. It has a very stabilizing function for the moods. If you've got mood swings, nervousness or agitation, or especially anxiety, milky oats is a really fabulous remedy that you want to really look at and say, okay, I'm going to give this a try. Now, you want to do it for more than just a few days. This is something where you're looking at taking this for several weeks, if not 2 to 3 months, to really get the benefit that you're looking at. Now, there have been studies on its ability to work with circulation problems, its ability to work with diabetes and heart disease, atherosclerosis. They're all clinical trials that have been looked at. Now, granted, the clinical trials were done on oats themselves and not on the milky oats. So what we get from the milky oats is mostly traditional use, but the traditional use is so wide ranging. It's literally worldwide, used the same way all around the world for just an amazing herbal ally that you can use. That is, and interestingly enough, it's got triterpene saponins and flavonoids. That one in particular is called isovitexin, and according to the studies, that isovitexin is found in the sprouts of plants and early seeds of different plants, lots of different plants, including oats. And that particular flavonoid is known to reduce anxiety levels, and it's actually one of the main components of passion flower. So really fascinating plant, natural nerve and brain tonic. Some of the uses of this, it can also be used to help end PMS, ease out PMS discomforts and menopausal mood swings. It's great for anybody whose nerves are really fragile and they're really tense. It's good for people with adrenal fatigue or a stressed immune system, and especially people, like myself, who like to burn the candle at both ends. The tincture is really something that you might want to investigate. So if I were to take you and say, okay, here's 5 benefits, great for your nervous system, great for mood and energy, great for sexual health and libido, really great to replenish your nervous system. And also with studies to show this, it helps you to increase focus and memory. So, and all of those, to bring it down to earth again, and Nancy and I love to talk about sleep, because in traditional Chinese medicine, sleep is the best yin tonic, the best restorative tonic you can take is sleep.
Sleep.
And milky oats are something that really does help you get back into that really normal process of healthy, happy sleep. So there you go. My favorite today, Avena Sativa.
Thank you, Tom. All right. I guess that's it for our 27th episode and the kickoff for year 2023. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks. And we are really grateful for your listenership. So keep listening. Let us know what you want to hear about. If there's something in particular that you're inspired to learn about, we're happy to share. Just give us a shout out through any of the places that you find us.
Yes, and please share us with your friends and anybody else that you think might be interested in what we're talking about. We really do try to bring you our own personal perspectives.
Yes, definitely.
All
right. Happy New Year, everyone. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Happy New Year.
Bye for now. Okay, everyone. Until next time, I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom.
We'll have more great topics and guests in the very near future. So join us right here in 2 weeks as the Supplement Super Sleuth
and the Herbal Storyteller take another deep dive into the fascinating world of the natural products industry.
See you later.